Hey, I'm Felissa Rose, and you're watching Keto and Crime.
Okay, well, there was obviously nothing back there. I'm hearing things. And the pipes are kind of rumbling. Maybe that was it. Jesus Christ!
Tracy G, what is the matter with you?
What the hell are you doing in a witch's costume?
It's Halloween, for gosh sakes. What's wrong with you? I'm going to a party.
My mother-in-law may find witches funny, but you know who didn't find witches funny? The early colonial government of Salem, Massachusetts, and basically all the Massachusetts Bay colonies. They actually rounded up what we know now are innocent people and actually executed them for witchcraft. So even though witches may be fun fodder today, they weren't in our very distant past. And with that being said, let's dive into a keto and crime classic, the Salem Witch Trials. But first, a quick word from our new sponsor, Keto Crisp. Hey everyone, I want to tell you about a great new sponsor for the channel, Keto Crisp. They reached out to me wanting to help me get back on my keto journey. As you know, I've had some issues and they know that sweets are a problem for me. So, I have partnered with them after sampling them, and they are really good bars. I highly recommend them. Filling, not too sweet, but just sweet enough. So if you're on a keto or a carnivore or low-carb lifestyle, they are the perfect bar. But moreover, what I want to talk about is the company itself. Adam Brenham is the founder, and he has suffered from cerebral palsy as well as obesity most of his life, and yet he still persevered and founded his own company. I think just the whole Keto Crisp brand is a monument to the human spirit, and I just wanted to point that out, that I only choose to partner with brands that I really believe in. I both believe in their product, I believe in Adam, and I really believe in their motto. It's about what you can do, not what you can't. And with that being said, I'm proud to welcome a new sponsor to the channel. You can try them out for a 20% discount. Just like most keto bars, they're a bit pricier than the junk you're going to find in the supermarket, but well worth it. And so you can get 20% off using my discount code, which I will link down in the description below. And I look forward to doing many more collaborations with Keto Crisp. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hey everyone, 𝐤𝐿𝐴𝐸𝐿 here, Salem Witch Trials. Let's jump right into this. And believe it or not, this is true crime. This actually happened, though there was no crime involved, at least on the accused sides. Just like with the McMartin case, the entire thing was caused by mass satanic hysteria, and any crime was on the side of the legal system. Let's jump into it, shall we? Alright. In a nutshell, the Salem Witch Trials took place around 3 different locations. You had the village of Ipswich in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Salem Town, and Salem Village. These were 3 very different cities, but they all came together because they had accused from all 3 locations. So in this little area, this is about 40 miles from Boston, you had these witch trials that took place between February of 1692 and May of 1693, in which over 200 people were accused of being witches. 19 were found guilty, and all 19 of those found guilty in the initial trials were executed by hanging. There was one man, 𝐒𝐿𝐴𝐸 that we'll talk about later. He was executed, but in a far different and more sinister way. And also 5 people died in jail waiting for trial or waiting for sentencing, because this was the 1600s, so there was a lot of sanitation and cleanliness issues in the jails, and a lot of them died of disease. So in the end, this was all chalked up to a mass hysteria, much like the satanic panic was, though this in a much heavier way, because this was before any sort of enlightenment, any sort of reason, and people literally believed that the very devil was at their door. and that these people they had accused were the ones bringing the devil to the door, so they had no qualms about killing them or leaving them for dead. So we are looking at something, 19 people, actually 20 if you count, actually 26 if you count the one that died by a very horrible torture, which we'll talk about, and those that died of disease in prison. 26 people lost their lives as a result of mass hysteria. Let's get into it, shall we? In this map, you see Salem Village, and it is apart from Salem Town, which was to its east, and Ipswich, which was kind of to its northeast. But this is Salem Village, where the majority of the trials took place. And within those three, especially Salem Town versus Salem Village, you had a lot of rivalries going on. Mainly you had farmers in the village, which were an agrarian society. They very much believed in working with your hands, honest day's labor, the whole 9 yards, versus the merchants that were present in Salem Town, which were a little more upper middle class. They believed in selling wares. A lot of them worked with the farmers in Salem Village, and a lot of the farmers believed that the merchants did not give them a proper price for the things that they grew and produced. So there was a lot of conflict there. The farmers believed that the merchants were all about money, cared nothing about faith or helping the colony to grow. Salem Town believed the farmers were uneducated humps and that they should be able to pay them whatever they deemed their wares are worth, and that they needed to get a life and an education. That was basically kind of the area you had there. So you had a lot of conflict. Also, you had a lot of Catholics versus Protestants. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was founded by the Puritans, which were a very strict sect of Protestantism, sprung from Calvinism, which came from Lutheranism, that wanted to break away from the Church of England. They didn't like the way the Anglican Church was going. They felt it was getting too liberal, and they wanted to go back to a more Calvinistic or fundamentalist view of the Bible, and that includes the supernatural, which will feed into this. The Church of England had long kind of broken away from the supernatural, as had the Catholic Church, and it was just more of a ceremony and allegory type of thing. But they really believed in that, and they wanted to be able to practice their religion. They couldn't because of King James in England, so they decided to leave England and move to the New World, and they established the Massachusetts Bay Colony around 1620. When we get to this time, you still have mostly Protestant Puritans, but you do have some Roman Catholics that have come over. Even though they weren't really connected with the Salem Witch Trials, you had the entire area around Rhode Island was populated by Catholics. Also, Rhode Island itself was actually a colony inhabited by criminals from England that had been sent over. It was originally called Rogues Island. Just an interesting little bit about the diversity of people in this. Also, you had the added stress of the indigenous people, the Native Americans, that were actually being funded by the French, who were in all-out war with the English over control of what is now the United States and Canada. So they were actually funding Indian uprisings or Native American uprisings against the English Puritans. So you had a lot of stress going on. And as a result of both that kind of trouble and trouble in England, you had a charterless society. The original charter had been, that was under Protestant rule, or original Anglican rule, had been taken out of existence by a brief little conflict that went on, and you still did not have a new charter that had been established. So these people were truly left to their own devices. In Salem Village, you had trouble with ministers, because at the head of all of these villages and towns was the establishing Puritan church, Calvinist church, which in Salem Village had not had a long-time pastor for many years, mostly because of the poverty in the village. They really couldn't afford to pay a minister, and also conflict between naturalists and supernaturalists, which supernaturalists are those that believe in angels and demons and the magical manifestation of God and the devil, and then you had naturalists that believes everything has a natural explanation. So you had a lot of that conflict, that combined with the conflict with the merchants of Salem Town and Ipswich, allowed them to kind of fall into a state of destitute, and it was hard to find a minister that everybody agreed with and they could also afford to pay. George Burroughs, who was their main minister from 1680 to 1683, and he would later actually be executed as a witch in these very witch trials, did his best to unite Salem Village and then later to try to reach out to Salem Town to kind of heal some of the rift. He didn't last long. Then you had finally Samuel Parris, who was brought in 1691 to take over and was actually offered a compromise on the pay. They gave him 1/3 in money, 2/3 in giving him food and other things his family would need. So they gave him some money, they gave him supposedly everything he would need to live, and they gave him a house to live in. So that's how they compromised, and Samuel Parris sided with what was becoming the majority in Salem Village in that they were supernaturalists. He believed in the supernatural representation and manifestation of God and the devil, and that was the ideology that won out for the time being. And as I'd said before, even the secular leaders, the one not actually attached with the church, had these Puritan influences. And of course, as we all know how politicians do, they kiss the butt of those in power or those, the majority, to stay in power. So you had all of this setting up for what would be a travesty of justice. Also, you had prevalent beliefs of the day that women, because this was a Puritan society, women had started to come into their own a little bit in England, though they were still a second-class citizen, but especially here in the colonies where they went back to very Puritan Calvinist roots, which, if you're interested, Calvinism is actually the Presbyterian Church in America now. If you're interested, it's the predestination, annihilation type of religion. If you're interested in seeing what became of the Puritans' religion, that's what happened to it. They truly believed that women were not as strong as men. They saw women as weak. They saw that women needed a protector. There was a huge suspicion of single women, widows, single women in general, women that put forth any type of resistance or opinion. There was a huge skepticism around that. They didn't think that was right. They didn't think that was godly because boobs, I guess.
You lie to me, I'll wipe up the floor with you worse than anybody else who's ever tackled you.
But anyway, they really didn't see women as anything but a vessel for recreation, or procreation. So the fact that most of the accused were women leads me to believe, now I'm not one to cry sexism, but this definitely leads me to believe that they used these trials to silence women that were trying to exert a little bit of independence. Now keep that in mind as we go through, because you're going to see evidence of that. And I'm not just putting it out there as an ideology. There's literal evidence of that in these trials. Then you had Cotton Mather. Cotton Mather was a Harvard-educated minister in Boston. He was highly regarded in the Puritan Church, one of the leaders of the Puritan Church, and author of many pamphlets and books. Number one was Memorial Providences, written in 1689, which outlined the Boston witch trials, because this was not sequestered only to Salem. It was also most of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the ones controlled by the Puritans anyway, had some sort of witch trials at some point in the 1600s. This was just the most popular iteration of it that we're about to get into. But in Boston, he had written a book about some of the accused in the Boston witch trials called Memorable Providences. It was based on the children of the Goodwin family of Boston, James Goodwin, who was a merchant, who had hired Anne Glover, also known as Goody because she was a good wife. She was basically, think of the Handmaid's Tale. I'm not saying that she was used as a sexual thing for him, but how the handmaidens kind of take over the household and kind of help rule the household in the absence of a wife. Well, that's what she did for this guy. She actually kind of controlled his household, did the chores, kind of taught the children, that sort of thing. Well, at some point, Martha Goodwin, the oldest daughter of the Goodwins, accused Anne Glover's daughter of stealing laundry and clothes, That caused a rift between the Goodwins and the Glovers, in which the Goodwin children accused Ann Glover of bewitching them, and they started to exhibit strange symptoms such as convulsions, hallucinations, burning skin, just all kinds of weird stuff that couldn't really be proven. And convulsions at this time could be faked because we didn't really have the type of medical technology we have today. So they were accused, and Ann Glover was one of about 6 women that was hanged in Boston as a result of these witch trials. So this book, which outlined the accusations, actually came out in favor of the accusations and the punishments rendered to the women of Boston. It came out as what people believe were the blueprints of the Salem Witch Trials. So this was a very popular book in Salem Village at the time. Okay, let's get into the meat of the Salem Witch Trials as we know it from 1692 to 1693. I'm only going to go over the most well-known, or the very first women and men accused during these trials, and the ones that had memorable reasons like their punishments and things that happened afterwards. But bear in mind there were over 200 people that were accused. 26 actually died as a result, 19 from hanging, 1 from basically being crushed to death, which we'll talk about, and 5 died in jail waiting for either sentencing or trial. So I can't possibly list all 200 of them, so I'm just going to list the most popular ones. But essentially it started in 1692. Betty Parris and Abigail Williams, who were the daughter and the niece of the Reverend Samuel Parris, along with Ann Putnam Jr. and Elizabeth Hubbard. And it's kind of a weird story why Ann Putnam Jr. is called Ann Putnam Jr. She was the only child of her parents and had a brother that had died, so they called her Junior. But you had these 4 children all around the ages of 9 to 13 that accused 3 different women of bewitching them. They started having convulsions, hallucinations, night terrors, and they literally said they had seen the actual devil, and the devil had been conjured by 3 specific women. You had Sarah Good, who was a homeless beggar. People believe she was targeted because she was a beggar, because she was poor, because she relied on the goodness of others to survive. She also had a 4-year-old child and was just kind of seen as a burden on the village, and a lot of people believe that she was accused or the trial was used. I'm not saying that these young children had that in their minds. I think they flipped out and were just scared, and I don't know why they did it. Later on, some of these girls would write that they made the entire thing up. So there's that. But I believe they were maybe coaxed by their parents or some other people in town to accuse these specific people. And because she was a homeless beggar, kind of seen as a burden on society, she was targeted. Sarah Osborne was probably an atheist. Probably, definitely a skeptic of the Puritan way of believing, because she had stopped going to church, had stopped adhering to a lot of the mandatory things that women and men had to adhere to be upstanding members of society. She had also married a former indentured servant who was of another race. They didn't like jungle fever back then. So they believed that was another reason that this woman was targeted. And then you had 𝐇𝐢𝐬𝐿, who was an actual slave owned by Samuel Parris from Barbados and the West Indies, who was actually a practitioner of voodoo and other things, and she was the first one accused. She was tortured and helped implicate the other 2 to kind of bring this together into the hysteria that actually led to the other 196 people being accused. And you got to remember, it wasn't actually just poor people and slaves that were accused. You had a few that were actually pretty well-known members of society in Salem Town. Remember, up until now, we talked about Salem Village as being where the people were accused. But Salem Town, you had some upstanding people there. You had Martha Corey, who was actually the wife of Giles Corey, one of the ministers in Salem Town. She was accused. And they believe it was because she expressed skepticism about the accusations of the other women in Salem Village. You had Rebecca Nurse, Also, an upstanding merchant's wife from Salem Town, also accused because she was skeptical about the whole thing to begin with. You had Dorothy Good, the 4-year-old daughter of Sarah Good, who was tortured and actually was forced into, they believe, forced into saying some incriminating things about her mother. Rachel Clinton was another one of the first accused. She was also in Salem Village, but she was unconnected with the others as far as we know. You had 𝐁𝐫𝐢𝐞𝐿, who was the husband of Martha Corey, stood up for his wife, also said that he didn't believe that the accusations were of God or a good thing. And then you had Bridget Bishop, who was another girl. She was actually the first one brought to trial and sentenced to death. She was accused because she was not living a Puritan lifestyle. She wore black clothes, which was forbidden, instead of the traditional dark blue and white, and walked around with her clothes torn quite a bit, and they didn't like the grunge look, so she was accused. So there you have the first 8 or 9 people accused, and now let's get into the actual trial. The court was called the Court of 𝐒𝐚𝐥𝐿 and Terminer. It was convened in Salem Town, so because Salem Town had the money and the better provisions for trying people, everything was moved to Salem Towns from Salem Village and Ipswich. But it was actually convened by William Slaughton, who was then the lieutenant governor. He was the chief judge, or magistrate as they're called. In September of 1692 alone, they indicted over 18 people, and there was actually a few oddities in this. They actually failed to indict William Proctor, who was a merchant in Salem Town. He was also a skeptic of the trial, and then they later rearrested him on new charges. So even though they didn't have enough evidence to actually bring charges and actually try him, he was later arrested on other charges. And then we get to 𝐒𝐿𝐽, who in fact, most of the people accused took plea deals, which still resulted in their death, so I don't understand why they did that. I would stand trial at that. But he refused to take a plea deal. Remember, his wife, Martha Corey, had been accused falsely, because everybody here was falsely accused, because there's no such thing as actual supernatural witches. I'm not talking about Wiccans or other people that, like to get with nature and believe in their little incantations. Do what you will. But as far as being able to actually bewitch people, I'm not buying that. But he was also a minister in Salem Town. He actually refused to plead guilty. He said, I'm not guilty. I'm not a witch. My wife's not a witch. I'm not pleading guilty. To try to extract a confession from him, they crushed him to death with rocks. They tied him down on the ground, put a wooden door over him, and started stacking rocks on him, trying to get him to confess to being a witch. He refused to. The only thing he ever said was, "More rocks, please, sir." That's all he ever said. And it took him 2 days to die. And I'm just going to say that's a hell of a guy right there. He gave the middle finger to Salem to the very end. So, but what were the actual evidence at these trials? Let's talk about that. 4 main types of evidence were presented. First were the accusations, and literally anybody from any town, any village in this area could accuse somebody of being a witch and having bewitched them if they concluded that a loss, financial or death, illness, any kind of loss to their delicate sensibilities, they could accuse someone of having caused that by witchcraft. That's pretty good. After the accusation, you had the evidence. 4 main reasons, 4 main types of evidence. You had spectral evidence, which is based upon the accused saying that they had dreams or visions of the person that was causing their suffering. Okay. You had what was known as a witch cake. Basically, you take somebody that was saying they were suffering from convulsions or some other illness as a result of witchcraft. You would ask them, who did this to you? They would tell you. You would have them pee in a cup. The person said they were suffering. You would take some rye and you would make a cake of their urine and that rye, feed it to a dog, and as the dog was eating the cake, supposedly the witch that had bewitched the accused would start to scream out in pain and agony, and that's how you knew that they were a witch. You had the touch test, which simply meant anybody that was having a seizure or a convulsion as a result of witchcraft, if they had the person accused or the person they thought were had bewitched them, touched them, and their suffering stopped, that meant they were a witch and they caused it. And there was other evidence, right up to having a big nose probably, that caused people to be accused of being a witch. Now remember, with all the conflict going on between all these different factions, don't you think it's pretty evident that a lot of this was used to settle grudges, take out rivals? So yes, there was a lot of that. This was, above everything, a huge mishandling of justice. And to sum it all up, they were declared a failure by the governor of Massachusetts and stopped in May 1693. Retributions were paid to the survivors and their immediate families over the next few years, and the legacy of these is that mass paranoia is still a thing in our society. This isn't the only time there's been mass paranoia in the United States. You got McCarthyism in the 50s. You had the satanic panic of the 80s. I think we as humans are just susceptible to this kind of stuff. So I'm glad we're in a little bit more of a modern age where maybe this won't happen as often, but if you look around at our current political climate, there's a lot of stuff going on out there that could also be construed as mass hysteria. So guard yourselves, people, and let's not ever have this happen again. Hope you enjoyed this. I really enjoyed doing this. I'll be back soon with another video. 𝐤𝐿𝐴, y'all. Like, comment, share, subscribe. 𝐤𝐫𝐢𝐞𝐦. Out.